My name is Carla Torgerson, and I'm here to speak about microlearning. My session is Making Microlearning Work: 4 approaches to microlearning and tips that add value for your learners. And this is me. My name is Carla. I'm the head of Learning Experience Strategy at Torrance Learning. We do custom training for large companies, often in the United States, but even global companies, and focusing often on e-learning, instructor-led training, virtual instructor-led training, and of course, microlearning as well. And you might know some of my work. I've written a couple of books about microlearning. The second one there was with ATD Press. A lot of people have given us a lot of really good feedback on that one. And I've also contributed chapters in these books as well. And before I start, I just wanted to say, Gut Map Subnida. Thank you. Thank you for being here today. And I don't speak Korean, so thank you for allowing me to speak in English with you as well today. Thank you. So what are we going to do today? Well, we've got three things that we're going to do. First, we'll look at 4 uses of microlearning, 4 ways that you can use microlearning to improve performance in your organizations. And then we'll look at some examples of microlearning. In fact, 1 example for each of those 4 use cases. And then I'm going to share some tips for designing those kinds of microlearning. So you're going to walk away with some great tips for every kind of microlearning that you could develop. And most importantly, you will leave empowered to capitalize on microlearning to improve performance in your organization. So if I achieve just one thing, it would be this. I hope that you will come away excited by what you can do with microlearning, have some new ideas, and be really excited to use it with your organization as well. So first off, what is microlearning? You know, people use so many different terms and they explain it in so many different ways. But for me, that's part of the confusion, right? Because we're all saying something different. And so for me, microlearning is content that is purposely shortened to enable the learner to fit learning within their work and personal lives. So we're talking about shortening that learning so that we can fit it in amongst all the other duties and things that we are doing. And I always like to say that everything old is new again, right? All these ideas that we have about microlearning are coming forth, you know, all like they're new. And I like to think of the amazing wrist radio, which was $298, right? This picture's kind of old. But we also have the new and improved wrist radio, which is just a little more than $298 here in the US. And my point here is that a lot of the things that we talk about with microlearning aren't new. We're talking about ideas that have been around for a very long time. Reinforcement, spaced repetition, performance support, lots and lots of things that we know work, that we know make a difference for training and development. And it's not like we all just woke up a couple of years ago and said, oh, microlearning, right? This has been an evolution of really good concepts and ideas that have been around for a very long time. And so what we're really doing is we're not coming up with something wholly brand new. We're actually taking advantage of these concepts that have been around for a long time. We're evolving our thinking and realizing some really fantastic things that we can do. So, as promised, I have 4 different use cases of microlearning, 4 ways that you can go micro. The first one is preparation. That will be anytime you use microlearning before longer form instruction. So before a instructor-led class or before a longer e-learning, anytime you're using something to prepare the learner, you can use microlearning there. Now, you can also use microlearning after that long form instruction, right? After that instructor-led training or after that e-learning module, right? Because we often talk about how learning is often forgotten, right? If we teach somebody something in a class one time, they forget it quickly. Well, with follow-up microlearning, you can support and reinforce and create a lot of retention. And then there is standalone. In standalone training, this is really where we just have one piece of microlearning, just one short video or short piece of e-learning, which the learner can take. There's no other instructor-led training or e-learning associated with it. It's just that one piece that stands on its own. And then finally, the last one is performance support or support. And this is when we provide materials for the learner while they are on the job. So some people don't even call them the learner anymore at that point. They're the worker, right? And you are providing materials to that worker to enable them to do their job more proficiently and more accurately. Now, each of these has a common name, and you're probably familiar with some of them as well. So the first one, preparation, we often call that pre-work or homework, right? And we've been doing that for a very, very long time, right? And for me, the interesting thing about microlearning is that I think we can really start thinking about how we engage learners to do their pre-work and do it more effectively, because it's always hard to get people to come prepared for classes. So then how do we use microlearning to give them that pre-work in shorter bursts and help them to complete it? The second one, follow-up, is often called boost learning. And that's because you're boosting the learning, right? You're giving reinforcement and repetition to help keep that learning alive after some sort of long form instruction. Standalone, I will admit I didn't have a better name. So when we made this model, I called it short form learning. And so to me, that's anything that, again, that stands on its own, probably somewhere 5 to 10 minutes. I'll share some seat times in a moment, but in that range. And then support is often called performance support. Again, the things that we're giving them while they're on the job. Now, again, like I said, there are seat times that people will talk about for all of these different forms of learning. And for me, again, it's really helpful to think of the recommended seat time by the use case, because they're different. And to me, that's really important, because we often say, oh, I'm doing microlearning. And then we all say we're doing micro, but we're doing one of these, which is something different from each other. And so if we think about each of these separately, that gives us really good guidance. And so these are guidance, again, guidance, but not hard and fast rules. But I would encourage that we consider approximately these seat times. So for pre-work, I recommend up to 10 minutes. So that would be if you have something that you want the learner to read in advance of coming to class, or maybe a case study or an article, or do a small assignment. If you can make it so they can complete it within about 10 minutes, you are much more likely to get them to actually complete that learning, right? And so the intention here is that you could give them one, maybe even two pieces, and they're more likely to complete it, more likely to get the learning from that material before they come to class. Now, the next one, boost learning, is really interesting. The research from Art Cohen shows that it should be no more than about a minute. He was doing research showing where he would send boost learning nuggets, like little pieces, to people after classes. And what he found was 30 seconds and 60 seconds were equally effective to things that were 5 minutes or longer. So for us, the big takeaway is keep it short as possible, because you're not teaching new material here. You're reinforcing the material that's already been learned. Now, with standalone or short form learning, I break it down into two pieces. On one hand, we have the informal learning. That is the material that people are not required to take, right? So for example, if you're on LinkedIn and you see a nice video that you watch, or even in your organization that you've got some good materials, but they're not being required, then I recommend about 4 minutes. There's pretty clear research that shows that people gravitate towards things that are about 4 minutes or less with things that are not required. And then the other one is the formal learning. That's the stuff that's required. That's when we tell learners that they have to take something, we track that they've completed, that sort of thing. And with those ones, I recommend up to about 8 minutes. I would love to keep them to 4. And I always used to make that my goal. But what I found was in required learning situations, we often had a little bit more that we needed to share, or the objectives were a little richer. And so I've kind of extended that up to about 8 minutes if it's going to be required. And then with performance support, again, a very interesting one here, usually anywhere from about 15 seconds to 5 minutes. So if it's something that the learner is going to be using right on the job, right? Like maybe they're on the phone with a customer and they're looking something up right there while they are on the phone, it's got to be fast. It's got to be at a glance, 15 seconds or so, right? But if they're going to pause their work just for a moment, use that little piece of micro learning, perhaps watch a quick tutorial or something like that, and then go back to their job tasks, 4 or 5 minutes is usually pretty tolerable for most learners. So again, we're trying to think about what would be useful to the learner, what would be helpful for each of these different use cases or types of microlearning, and also making sure that we are giving them an appropriate amount of content, but not overwhelming them. So let's take a look at some examples. And again, I've got an example for each type. So the first one, the pre-work, the example that I'm going to show you is we were doing a project with a large organization where people moved between roles very, very quickly. The organization was growing fast. And so people were often working in roles for which they were not trained. And so what the organization was doing was they were trying to give people lots of informal learning and materials they could use to learn from. But they also found that people were just overwhelmed, right? They were working a lot, they were tired, emails were crazy, and they were also working in a role that was new to them. And so they were constantly feeling like they were behind and overworked. And so it was really hard to get people to do the training that was being shared with them. So what the organization did was they created a program called Learn How to Learn. And what they did was it was a 8-week program, and every 2 weeks, so there was 4 sessions for 8 weeks, 4 every 2 weeks apart, 30 minutes of e-learning. That's all it was, just 30 minutes of e-learning every 2 weeks over this 2-month period. And that wasn't the micro part, but that was the core learning, was they were teaching strategies for learning on the job and learning new materials and things like that. Now, what they wanted to do also, however, was in addition to these 4 30-minute e-learning modules, they wanted to make sure that the learners were really ready for this course, right? Because you can imagine that probably these overworked, tired employees, the last thing they thought they needed was 2 hours of training about how to learn better, right? And so what they did was they created a little piece of microlearning as pre-work, a little short piece that came before the training. And it looked like this. This is just one screen of it. It was a short 5-minute animated with voiceover. And you can see here, the example, what if you could make your learning automatic, make time for your learning? And then it fills in the rest of this screen and carries on and goes on to why this course is so valuable and important. And so again, it was less than 5 minutes, and it was almost a commercial for why you want to take this training that's coming up. And so that was really the intent, was 5 minutes or less, and we get people interested and excited and ready for the program which was about to come. Now, the next one, the Boost Learning, it's interesting, that same program also used Boost Learning. So what they did was in between those 30-minute segments, those e-learning modules that they did every 2 weeks, they also sent emails to the learners, reminding them of things they learned and encouraging them to put what they were learning into action. And so the examples look like these. These were actually done by email. We are actually right now working on it as part of a chat bot. And then in the future, we are actually also, our phase 3 is intended to work in, I believe it is Teams and Slack. So, so kind of working through some different technologies as well. But with this example, we have, and we partnered with the Reinforcement Academy, the logo and URL down there in the bottom. And they're very, very focused on exactly the boost learning part. And so this was intended to reinforce. And so, for example, this one says, now that you've completed the first course, it's time to apply best practices that will enable you to build your personal knowledge system efficiently. You will receive a series of messages called impact triggers that will provide you with insights that can increase your level of efficiency in using your personal knowledge system. These messages are intended to help you learn smarter, not harder, by modifying your old ways of learning, right? So just very quick, you could read that in 30 seconds or less, right? And then a little while later, you get another message. Remember, we had 2 weeks in between each e-learning module. So every few days, we had another little piece. And this one is reminding them of an activity they did in that first e-learning course. And it says, use the completed diagram and select the skills you want to focus on. You can choose more than one. So this was one of the activities they had done in the e-learning, and they were reminded of it and reminded of the things they were supposed to be thinking about and doing. And then a few days later, they get another message that says, plan a meeting with your manager and discuss the areas of learning you've identified that you want to work on. And then actually a message of like motivation as well, that these skills can help you innovate and execute faster than the competition in the future, avoid becoming complacent, you know, and again, less than 30 seconds here to really encourage the learner to take their learning forward. And now I've got a different example for the standalone learning. Now, I've actually got 2 examples that I'll share here. The first one is one that we've been working on for a while now. We have been developing off-the-shelf training, which is training that any organization could use. It's not a custom solution. And with these, the style we've taken, the approach we've taken is to use short micro-learning videos, and they all stand on their own. So you can take a single piece of learning and learn a single concept all by itself. And so a screenshot, an example of this one, comes from one of our programs on diversity and inclusion. And this particular one is about reducing implicit bias. You can see in this case, we used a video approach. You know, we've got an energetic speaker who then also has text kind of coming in on the side there of the video. So again, just another style of learning object, right? I showed some more traditional e-learning before. Now this time, it's just a video. Now this video here is approximately 4.5 minutes. And the idea is it just stands alone. You could learn about implicit bias and how to reduce it in less than 5 minutes. But if you wanted, what we also did was we created a series of these. Every one of these all stand on their own, but you could take all of them together and they are from a related series of topics. And so in essence, we're creating a longer series of learning, but you can choose as the learner which ones to take or in what order, because they don't have to be taken in any particular sequence. And so you can see here that there's an example of the 3 courses. In fact, this particular topic it's called our Build the Foundation program, and there's actually a 4th video as well. Didn't fit on the screen, but there are 4 videos, each less than 5 minutes. For a total, it makes for about a 15-minute course if you took them all together, but it really is more of a micro-learning first approach that you could take any of the pieces and you could choose not to take all of them if you wanted. Now, I have another example. I unfortunately cannot share screenshots of this one, but with this one, we were working with a company that was they were writing creative briefs. Basically, they were writing outlines for their marketing department, or in their marketing department, outlines of what they were going to do in a marketing campaign. And there's certain things that you are expected to have, certain things you're supposed to just, include in this. Again, it's more than just an outline, but there's these particular parts you have to identify. Where you're going with this marketing campaign, how you're going to do it, what's your direction, that sort of thing. And so they created short e-learning modules, again, 5 minutes or less, about each of the different parts of the creative brief. And so just little tiny bits of learning about all the different parts of this outline, if you will, that you would create and need to write. So you could take all of them, or you could take any single part to learn the parts that you don't know well. And then that brings me to performance support, the idea of supporting the learner on the job and helping them with job tasks as they're being done. Now, it brings me back to that same example. What was really cool with that project was that in addition to these very short e-learning pieces, they also created a tool that people could use to actually help them write their creative briefs. And so what they did was it was kind of like an online form that you would fill out all the parts, and it would walk you through the steps of doing the creative brief. But it was more than just a form, because what it also had was learning embedded in there. With every part of the form, there was an opportunity to click a button to get an example of an excellent example. There was also an opportunity to click for some little bit of instruction. And in fact, they brought back the instruction from the standalone modules that they were embedded in there. And then in addition, they had a way that you could even see what peers and colleagues had written, so that you could see how what you were writing compared to others. So the idea here was that we're very, very much supporting the learner on the job while they're doing the task that they are supposed to be doing on the job. And we're helping walk them through that task rather than just, leaving it to chance, right? We're helping them and supporting them and enabling them to do the task most proficiently. So the next big thing I want to talk about is just tips for designing each of those kinds of microlearning. Like, how do you do this really well? And my first thing that I want you to think about is, where can you go micro with your content? I'd like you to think just for a moment about the training you deliver or that your organization is using. Where might be one spot that you could go micro, all right? Think about it. Now, you might even have more than one, but pick at least one of these, because I'm going to share tips for each of them. And I want you to be thinking about which ones really apply for you. So with that, the first one, the preparation. If you're creating microlearning for preparation, my biggest key is to make it feel easy to complete. Really make it feel like the learner can get this done easily. Also, help learners to see how it will be valuable for them, because I think that oftentimes people don't do the pre-work because it doesn't feel valuable. They don't see how it will be important, right? So really layer in some motivational elements of why they should bother to do this work. In reinforcement or boost learning, again, as I mentioned before, making it very short. 30 seconds is all you need. When you go longer, you're not adding value for the learner, and so you're increasing the likelihood that they're not going to consume it, right? You can also use repetition and gamification to make it feel a little more fun, right? Make it feel like a game. Give them a new question every day or a couple questions every week, right? Those sorts of things can make it a lot more fun. And now there's another piece here that sometimes outside of that pure reinforcement, sometimes people also add extra materials with extra depth, right? Extension materials. And if you're offering those, really think about what people might want, right? After that class, what are the things they really wanted most, right? And those actually also generally fit within the bucket of the standalone, right? And so when you think about standalone, Here's some tips for you. First is that you want to use either interactions to reinforce performance, right? So make it interactive, or have it be used so close to the moment of performance on the job that they don't need as much interaction, right? If they're doing it, if they're looking at your demo, watching your piece of e-learning, and then going straight to doing it on the job, right? Your tutorial, and then they do it on their desk. You don't need as much interaction. You just need them to make sure that they're using those skills right away. Also, focus on just one objective or topic, and that will keep it nice and short. Also, make sure that content is really discrete, so it can be consumed separately from other modules. It shouldn't be part 1, part 2, part 3. It should be objective 1, objective 2 is separate, and then objective 3 is completely separate as well. Also, like I said, place it as close to that moment of performance as possible. The closer that learning is to the moment the learner needs to use it, the more effective the transfer will be, the more likely they will be successful with the learning. And then also think about whether you're going to make it required or optional. Again, standalone training does not have to be required, and sometimes it's to our advantage not to. And then finally, for support, you really want to think about the tasks, the specific tasks where the learner might make mistakes or forget important details, right? Think about the times in their job when they need that support. And then provide only as much information as they need to complete the task, right? Don't give them more. Just keep it as focused and narrow and tight as possible. And then also consider what the learner is doing when they need support, and use that to help determine the best format, the best delivery, the best length, right? What are you giving them, and what would be the best for them? And then finally, for critical tasks, really have them practice using that performance support right in the training class or in the e-learning. And then they practice it in the learning environment, and then they're more likely to use it on the job as well. And regardless of how you're using microlearning, which tips you're using, how you slice it up, always ask yourself, how will I improve performance? To me, that's the key, right? Like regardless of the tips or the 4 use cases, if you just ask yourself, how will I improve my learner's performance? It will be clear, right? And you will do an awesome job. And so with that, if you're interested in more, I do teach the microlearning certificate program with ATD, the Association for Talent Development. And again, I also have these 2 books about microlearning as well. Thank you for being here with me today. And thank you for your attention and for being here. Thank you so much.